Hey everybody, and welcome to another episode of BacklogBusters, where I'm busting out my gaming backlog one video at a time and letting you know if after all these years, these games are worth playing today. In today's episode, we're learning to never walk around town at night in Baldur's Gate: Dark Alliance. I mainly grew up as a Nintendo kid, partly due to my friends mostly having Nintendo consoles, and partly because they seemingly had more E-for-everyone games that I could play at the time. Not that I turned my nose up at any other consoles, I just didn't have much access to them, though I made sure to play them any chance I got. So it's not hard to believe that I missed Baldur's Gate: Dark Alliance when it was released with a T for Teen rating on the PS2 and didn't come to the GameCube or Xbox for almost a year. Though I distinctly remember seeing this box art all over the shelves of my local EB Games at the time. So I was glad to see a suggestion in the comments to check out this game, as besides having a loose idea that it's a Diablo-Esque co-op game, I'd never heard much about the game itself, so let's find out if it's worth playing today. Baldur's Gate: Dark Alliance released for the PlayStation 2 on December 4th, 2001 in North America, and December 14th of the same year in Europe, with ports to the Xbox and GameCube coming towards the end of 2002 in North America and early 2003 in Europe. A GBA port was weirdly released way later in 2004, and based on footage online, it does look pretty faithful to the home console game, only isometric and limited to one player. The original game on PS2 was developed by Snowblind Studios, who are most well known for this and two Champions of Norath games, which were also made on the PS2, with Snowblind Studios later being merged into Monolith Productions in 2012. The first Dark Alliance game was published by Black Isle Studios, who originally developed the Fallout, Planescape, and Icewind Dale series of RPGs, and they actually took over development duties for Dark Alliance 2, but sadly the entire studio staff was laid off and the studio closed in 2003, 1 month before the release of the sequel that still hit store shelves weirdly. The name Black Isle Studios was then revived to release the modern ports of Dark Alliance 1 and 2 that we're playing today. But it seems as though they just serve as a label now and not an actual studio. Dark Alliance received pretty favorable reviews, sitting at an 87 on Metacritic, with reviews at the time calling out its visuals, Diablo-like action, and co-op play. But all that was at the time of its release, so let's examine this game today, starting with the things that I liked. The very first thing that jumped out to me when starting Baldur's Gate: Dark Alliance was actually the water. I don't know how the water looks this good on a game that launched on the PS2. There are ripples when you do anything. Attack, jump, spin, with the ripples all bouncing around until they eventually even out. And while at first I was just shocked at the detail of the water, I soon discovered it had a gameplay function as well, because some of these dimly lit dungeons make it hard to see the enemies approaching you. When, say, a gray rat is against some dark gray dungeon floors, sometimes you don't see them till they actually attack. But whenever I got in the water, I had a huge ripple to alert me to approaching danger, which was surprisingly helpful in this game. And doubly so when the invisible enemies start sneaking up on you later in the game and you're able to use the power of water to better pinpoint their location. Sure, it's kind of a small, silly thing, but I'm not sure I've ever played a game where I've delayed progressing just to go splash around in the water for a little bit whenever a pond shows up. Ever since I first played Gauntlet Legends in an arcade, I've been hooked on hack and slash dungeon crawler games, especially ones with co-op. Years later, a cousin of mine introduced me to Diablo 2 on his PC, which featured more RPG elements and a near constant drop of weapons and armor to swap out. But shockingly, the argument of, "But you fight against the devil," did not persuade my parents to let me actually purchase the game. Much later, I got into games like Dungeons & Dragons Heroes, Torchlight, and finally got my first game in the Diablo franchise when Diablo 3 launched. I still love these types of games today, so I was very excited to boot up Baldur's Gate and find that it scratched that same Diablo itch. You'll be hacking and slashing your way through dungeons with your weapon of choice, be it a sword, bow, axe, or any other weapon you stumble across. And upgrading your gear through drops from chests, monsters, or by visiting a local trader.
We have many fine deals
Who can help you sell off all that extra gear for cold, hard gold coins. But it's the snappy, satisfying combat that made me enjoy my time in Baldur's Gate, as it feels a little more direct than just clicking around in Diablo, as you have full control of your character's movement, as well as have the ability to jump, which, okay, this is a basic thing, but it does lead to some unique platforming areas and puzzles that I've never really experienced in a game like this, though I wish there was more of them to further differentiate from other games in the genre. You're also able to block, something you're going to do a lot in this game, and the controls also mention that you can parry. But I've never once actually managed to parry an attack as far as I can tell, either taking a hit or just plain blocking. I could be off on the timing, or maybe I did trigger a parry, but it just wasn't obvious because I'm used to the From Software style stagger animation that just doesn't exist here. Then for your spells and feats, you'll be swapping out the Diablo style hotbar for a menu you can cycle through to select the spell or feat of choice and trigger it with the B button. I did wish there was a little more action in the action RPG part of this, like being able to hold the A button for your combo, or maybe having a heavy and a light attack. Really just anything to save my thumb a little bit from constantly mashing the A button. Or maybe have the ability to dodge roll, as I found the character just a little bit slow when trying to escape enemies' attacks. Or a sprint button for when I'm slowly making my way back to the main path after clearing out a side one. Or maybe make the parry more reliable or just easier to understand the timing of if I was just bad at it. Because I found myself frequently overwhelmed by hordes of enemies, and although your block works well, it's also very small and directional, so enemies will quickly run around to your sides and back and just attack you there. So I really would have appreciated anything to better deal with these situations rather than having to run away or take the hits and burn through potions until you die. But overall, I like how much of the dungeon crawling hack and slash Diablo-esque formula was captured here in an early PS2 game, especially with 2-player co-op. It's just as addictive and repetitive stress injury inducing as the games that seemingly inspired it, but adds in some more direct control of your character, which made it very satisfying to play, even if I wish they had pushed it a little further in that direction. Obviously, Dungeons & Dragons inspired a lot of character stats in Diablo and many other action and non-action RPGs, but I do appreciate that Dark Alliance pulls directly from D&D, specifically the 3rd edition, so it goes into much more detail than I'd expect for a game like this, such as how increasing your strength not only increases damage, but also carry weight. Stats like Wisdom increase your experience gain, and increasing your charisma will actually lower the prices of goods sold by merchants. Will you know any of this by looking at the in-game stat page? No, probably not. But knowing all this extra stuff is going on behind the scenes and you aren't just assigned some arbitrary number of items you can hold makes the whole game feel a little deeper to me. And you're also wide open to make horrible leveling mistakes with your character, equip weapons that you aren't proficient with, and more. Truly an open-ended role-playing experience. And while I would have loved a way to refund my stat points or see in-game which weapons were best suited for dexterity or strength, Baldur's Gate sticks hard to its D&D roots and asks you to read the manual. I was also impressed by the amount of variety as you travel from standard run-of-the-mill dungeons to a barren desert, chilly peaks, and much more. At first I was just excited to go outside, as I fully expected this to be completely in-dungeon, with maybe different scene dressing as it went on. But with quite a few scenery, layout, and terrain differences as you go, it feels like you're traveling through a land, rather than exploring a dungeon with just different colored rocks on each floor. There are also some light puzzles that you'll need to work through, and a small selection of traps you'll encounter throughout the game as well, which vary between spikes that pop up to weird eyeballs that disintegrate you. I do wish there were more of these, because all the ones you do encounter are a really fun change of pace, but they're mostly saved for inside the dungeons and never really seem to be in other locations. Then there's the huge manual of monsters that this game is able to pull from. And similar to level variety, it starts with some basic rats, goblins, orcs, then quickly expands to feature gelatinous cubes, these invisible displacer beasts, whatever a boule is, and a lot more. For the first game in a series, it's really exciting that the developers got to pull so much from D&D's rich history of locations, creatures, and lore, because it made every area feel really exciting to experience. And I just wonder if we would have seen the same amount of variety without so much to draw from. The game starts with you getting mugged, seconds after entering Baldur's Gate. The town watch shows up to stop the muggers, but not before they steal your possessions. The guards insist that the thieves are getting bolder by the day, and that you should stay off the streets after sunset. But y'all, this town is one big square with a fountain in the middle. There are no streets, not really any alleys, just a large open square, and all I did was walk in the gates towards the tavern that the guards tell me to seek shelter in. How bad have things gotten in Baldur's Gate that you can't even be outdoors at night when the so-called watch can literally see the entire town from anywhere they stand? Well, in an effort to help the citizens take their town back, you'll start by tackling the Elfsong Tavern's rat problem, and end up chasing down your own muggers along the way, eventually discovering odd creatures and dark plots that take you through forests, mountains, swamps, and a lot more as you progress through the story. The game doesn't do the best job at breadcrumbing the story throughout the game, as you'll really only get lore and story info from specific characters like the tavern owner Aelith and the speaker of Ruger clan, Torgir, who will fill you in on a lot of details if you're willing to listen to them. Maybe you could argue it's trying to be more similar to playing a game of D&D at a table, where sessions are broken up kind of between combat encounters and then exploring and talking to characters, but your dungeon master only made like 3 quest givers. There are some interesting character bits, like how if you play as the fighter Cromlech, who actually belongs to the dwarf clan you find later, they recognize and welcome him back.
Brother, can it be you have returned to us?
I just wish there was more interesting role-playing bits like this sprinkled throughout, or even if the story was narrated more than just the opening, maybe while exploring dungeons rather than just receiving the story directly from the 3-ish characters in the game. I did think that the overall story ties up nicely in the end and is interesting, even if it does happen in some big lore dumps towards the end of the game. Now we've made it to my first dislike, most of which I'm assuming has to do with how I chose to play this game. Solo. The difficulty levels in this game I think are completely mislabeled. Really easy difficulty should be listed as solo play, and normal difficulty should be labeled as co-op, and then hard difficulty could be, I don't know, New Game Plus or something like that. What I'm trying to say is that it felt like this game assumes you're playing with 2 players, because I started this on normal as a single player game, and enemies took so little damage, and I took so much damage, that I ended up spending most of my time blocking, getting 1 hit in, blocking again, over and over. It was boring, to say the least, and I had so little money after constantly buying up health potions that I could never afford much better armor or weapons. Now, normally I'm not looking for ways to grind and even actively avoid it if I can, but I was leveling up so slowly and earning so little cash while enemies just steamrolled over me like I'd walked into an area where everyone was 10 levels above me. Everything just made me think I needed to go grind levels and cash, but it's literally impossible from what I could tell, as the game never respawns enemies, there are no optional dungeons, and there are very few side quests, all of which I completed. After finishing the game, I realized that technically I could have started a new game, imported my character from this one, and played the opening multiple times, but that doesn't seem like a good option either. So my only other thought was that this is meant to be played co-op, because if you were playing on normal difficulty but could split the aggro of enemies between 2 characters, that seems way easier. But for one single player, it just didn't feel right, especially after putting 6 hours of playtime into this game, only for every save station to just remind me that it was only counting 3 hours of forward progress because so much time was lost to dying. Because I died so often, and when I wasn't dying, I was blocking and slowly chipping away at enemies. It was boring, tedious, and not at all effective against more than 1 enemy at a time. But there was no other way to increase my level for the areas I was in. Maybe since I never figured out the parry mechanic, that would have helped me just blow through normal difficulty, or maybe I had horrible luck with random weapon and armor drops. I could have chosen the wrong class, or bought the wrong skills, or I could just be bad at some other mechanic or the game in general. But to me, this just wasn't fun. So I started completely over, chose easy mode, or as I like to call it, solo mode, chose the fighter instead of the archer, and within 2 hours I was back to where I made it on the normal, aka co-op difficulty mode, that had taken me 6 hours to reach previously. I played through the entire game like this, and I had a much better time. I still died quite a bit, I was challenged by bosses and hordes of monsters, but I could actually spend more than 1 second out of block if I needed to. One thing you'll learn throughout the main game is to save as often as possible so you don't lose a big chunk of progress, as well as use your recall potions to head back into town, to stock up on health and mana potions, and upgrade armor and weapons. That's the normal loop of this game. Upgrading or outfitting yourself when enemies increase in difficulty, and or hoping you level up soon. But one thing that still confuses me about this game is, other than being over leveled for the enemies you're facing or having a good weapon drop, how do you get good at this combat? Do you kite the enemies around doors? Do you swipe at them once and then pull your shield up or run away? The most powerful I felt in this game was in the final area, where I guess enemies were dropping a ton of XP because I shot up several levels, which had never happened anywhere else in the game, instead gaining maybe a level every few areas, if that. But other than blocking when enemies attack, doing a spin attack when they crowd around me, and trying to focus on just one enemy at a time, what else am I missing about this combat system that would make me more effective other than just leveling higher? I ask this because of one level called the Gauntlet that unlocks when you beat the game. You have a 15-minute timer, have to defeat every single enemy, and you've got a fixed set of stats, skills, and spells. Plus, there's no store to buy any potions from, so all health and mana potions are random drops from chests and enemies. You'll also restart the level when you die. So, how do I beat this level? Honestly, please tell me how I can, because I looked around for tips after dozens of attempts, and the only thing I found was people comparing this modern remaster to the original PS2 version and saying that the remaster's way harder. But that sounded a little far-fetched to me. The one thing I did find was several people mentioning a supposed bug where if you hit start as soon as you die and choose change character, you can import your in-game character with all your stats, gear, and complete the gauntlet with them. So I tried it, and yeah, it works somehow, which unlocks an extreme difficulty. And this requires you to play with an imported character from a previous playthrough. Now, I'm not sure if anything changes in this extreme difficulty other than the difficulty. All the store items seem the same, and I didn't notice vastly different drops from playing the opening. But I do wonder how and when you'll manage to get gear suitable for these enhanced enemies on extreme mode. But it's a cool unlock, especially with the fact that it's basically a New Game Plus mode where you keep your levels, skills, and spells and start at the beginning. At first I thought the Gauntlet was a cool little unlock after beating the game, but the more attempts I made, it just left me feeling more and more frustrated. Plus, with your build in the Gauntlet set in stone with no gear to swap out, no levels to gain, and no skills to unlock, it just felt so counter to everything I enjoyed about the main game. And I just still have no idea how to legitimately get better at the combat to complete the Gauntlet and unlock the extreme mode the correct way. Also, of course this game has spiders in it. It's a fantasy game, and they are apparently legally required to fill several levels to the brim with them. Obviously, people would be furious if they didn't make the roster. This again brings me to the same conclusion from the Hobbit video. Poison is the worst status effect in games, and these terrifying creatures somehow manage to bite through your shield, so you'll pretty much always be poisoned when fighting up close, unless you and a co-op buddy can rain down arrows and spells before they reach you, another point for co-op play. But overall, ew, gross, just leave the spider enemies in the past. Who likes fighting these? Now, with all that in mind, how did I feel about this game overall, and would I recommend Baldur's Gate Dark Alliance as a game that should be on your backlog? Maybe. There's no denying the big names in the genre that have had years to innovate and provide quality of life updates since Baldur's Gate's original release. But if you want a co-op game where you can hack and slash your way through a dungeon filled with inventive monsters from the world of D&D, or if you're interested in splashing through puddles as you get to the bottom of what's going on at Baldur's Gate, the game still feels good and has the addictive loot, leveling, and snappy combat of any good RPG. Just be careful, as the game feels tuned for 2 players, so either bring a buddy along or consider turning it down to deal with the hordes of enemies that are stingy with their gold drops and great at running around your shield and attacking your sides and back. Maybe you'll fare better at attempting the completely optional post-game dungeon, but even after finishing the game, I never felt like I understood the intricacies of combat enough to get past it. And, as with every fantasy game, be prepared for way too many spiders. And I'll throw out my normal message, that my opinion on this game is not meant to tarnish any fond memories you have of playing this, And if you loved or still love this game, tell me why in the comments below. I'd love to hear about your experiences and talk more about the parts I really liked. Now, if you're interested in playing this game, thankfully there are modern options available. You can, of course, go pick up a copy of the PS2, Xbox, or GameCube original, but a remaster was made available in pretty much everything in 2021. If you have a PS4, PS5, Xbox One, Xbox Series, Switch, it's on all of those, right alongside its sequel, Dark Alliance 2. Also, if you have a Mac, Windows PC, or even Linux, aka the Steam Deck, both games are also available on there as well. Looking at footage of the original game, these remasters mainly seem to bump up the resolution to a maximum of 4K, clean up the visuals, but other than that, they seem largely unchanged from the original releases. But that's it for this episode of Backlog Busters. Have you played Baldur's Gate Dark Alliance? What did you think? Is it a must-play game that needs to be on others' backlogs? Let me know in the comments below. I'd love to talk more about it. And also let me know if you have a suggestion for a game that I should clear off my backlog next, and I'll work to make a video on it. If you enjoyed this video, please hit the little thumbs up button, it helps a lot, and if you'd like to see more, tap the subscribe button. And if you want to get alerted the second my next video comes out, hit the bell icon. And as always, thank you all so much for watching, and see you in the next video. Bye.